a new chapter of Bhagavad-gita, chapter 2.1, and as you can tell, I'm reporting from the car out in the field. So we'll start with Jai Radha Madhava. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Vishnupad Paramahamsa Pali Rajakacharya Astotra Shatashi Shimadis Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Skaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shiva Sadigora Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai Jai Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Shama Kun Radha Kun Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Navadvip Mayapur Dham Ki Jai Ganga Mai Ki Jai Yamuna Mai Ki Jai Tulasi Devi Maharani Ki Jai Samaveta Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to all the assembled devotees, all glories to all the assembled devotees, all glories to all the assembled devotees, all glories to Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga, all glories to Prabhupada. So we are reading from Srimad Bhagavad-gita as it is, and we're beginning chapter 2. So we have observed in the first chapter how Arjuna has gone to the battlefield, and when he's confronted with the task ahead of him, he's lost his nerve and he feels overcome with emotion and doesn't want to fight. So chapter 2 is where Krishna begins to respond. Okay, nearly there. There we go. So again, we have Sanjaya speaking. The beginning of Bhagavad Gita is Sanjaya retelling or relaying the events of the Battle of Kurukshetra to Dhritarashtra. And so now again, Sanjaya is speaking. Sanjaya uvacha tam tata kripaya virshtam ashru purna kurlekshenam vishidantam idam vakyam uvacha madhusudanaha. So we'll do the word by word. Sanjaya uvacha, Sanjaya said, tam, unto Arjuna, tata, thus, kripaya, by compassion, avishtam, overwhelmed, ashru purna akula, full of tears, ikshanam, eyes. Vishadantam, lamenting. Idam, these. Vakyam, words. Uvacha, said. Madhusudanaha, the killer of Madhu. So the translation is, Sanjaya said, seeing Arjuna full of compassion, his mind depressed, his eyes full of tears, Madhusudan, Krishna, spoke the following words. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhakta-yogi Swami Srila Prabhupada. Material compassion, lamentation, and tears are all signs of ignorance of the real self. Compassion for the eternal soul is self-realization. The word Madhusudana is significant in this verse. Lord Krishna killed the demon Madhu, and now Arjuna wanted Krishna to kill the demon of misunderstanding that had overtaken him in the discharge of his duty. No one knows where compassion should be applied. Compassion for the dress of a drowning man is senseless. A man fallen in the ocean of nescience cannot be saved simply by rescuing his outer dress, the gross material body. One who does not know this and laments for the outward dress is called a Shudra, or one who laments unnecessarily. Arjuna was a Kshatriya, and this conduct was not expected from him. Lord Krishna, however, can dissipate the lamentation of the ignorant man, and for this purpose the Bhagavad-gita was sung by him. This chapter instructs us in self-realization by the analytical study of the material body and the spirit soul, as explained by the Supreme Authority, Lord Sri Krishna. This realization is possible when one works without attachment to fruitive results and is situated in the fixed conception of the real self. Om Jnana-timirandasa Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshu Amalitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So now we're entering into a different part of the Bhagavad-gita, a new chapter. And until now, Arjuna has been expressing his doubts and his feelings, and he's become overwhelmed with emotion. So now in the Bhagavad-gita, Krishna is about to reply. But even before Krishna replies, Prabhupada is giving us a hint, and Sanjaya is also giving us a hint about what's to come. We can see that in this verse, Sanjaya is referring to Krishna as Madhu. And Prabhupada is saying that Arjuna wanted Krishna to kill the demon of misunderstanding that had overtaken him. So it's interesting because it's not even Arjuna speaking here, it's Sanjaya speaking, but with his spiritual, with his, I wouldn't call it spiritual exactly, but with his mystical vision, Sanjaya is understanding Krishna's thoughts and Arjuna's thoughts. And he's reflecting them here by using the word Madhusudana. So this is the first point that we see here, is that when Arjuna was in a situation of doubt, he turned to Krishna to get his doubts clarified. He didn't try to solve everything on his own, but he referred to Krishna, and in this case, Krishna is representing the spiritual master. So we can also directly take shelter of Krishna by praying and by studying Krishna's direct words in Bhagavad-gita. And we can also, as Arjuna is doing here, take shelter of the spiritual master and the senior devotees, and those others that are practicing Krishna consciousness, for advice when we are feeling unsure about what to do, and when we feel that we need guidance and reassurance, and we need some encouragement in our duty. Because we can understand that Arjuna was a Kshatriya, and he knew what his duty was, but for some reason he'd become overwhelmed in the situation. And so he's asking for some support so that he could do his duty properly. Now, the point that I find really interesting that Prabhupada's bringing out here, which Prabhupada brings out many times, is that real compassion is compassion for the eternal soul. And what that means is, Prabhupada says, self-realization. So the real compassion is helping someone to become self-realized, starting with ourselves. And so he's saying here that material compassion, lamentation, and tears are all signs of ignorance of the real self. It's very interesting. Does that mean that a devotee is hard-hearted and doesn't care for the suffering that people are going through? You know, for example, if there's an earthquake and people have lost their homes, does that mean that devotees just are very brazen and what's the word I'm thinking of? The word's escaping me, but they're basically very sort of hard-hearted, and they're like, anyway, you're not the body. Don't worry about it. You know, like, no, devotees don't have this mood. They are compassionate. And Prabhupada described that earlier on in the first chapter, that Arjuna's mood of compassion is actually a natural quality of a devotee. So we seem to have a contradiction here. On the one hand, Prabhupada's saying here, material compassion is a sign of ignorance of the real self. And at the same time, earlier in the first chapter, he was saying that compassion is a natural quality of a devotee. Contradictory. So how can we reconcile it? Well, this is what Prabhupada is saying here, that no one knows where compassion should be applied. And just a point to note here also that Prabhupada has put material compassion as a sign of ignorance of the self. And then he's saying that compassion for the eternal soul is self-realization. And again, Prabhupada says that no one knows where compassion should be applied. Compassion for the dress of a drowning man is senseless. You know, a man who's fallen in the ocean of nescience cannot be saved simply by rescuing his outer dress. So you imagine someone's fallen into the ocean and you grab their life jacket, but you leave the person behind, you know, or you take their shirt, but you leave them behind. So obviously this is foolish. So in the same way, if we're just concerned with the matters relating to the body and mind within this world, it's really useless because, you might temporarily give some relief of a material situation, but then ultimately, have you really helped the person? Because they're still going to face more material suffering from the body or the mind or from other living creatures, whatever. And this cycle of birth and death, old age and disease will continue. So we never really resolve the problem properly until we get to the root and we get out of material consciousness and therefore become Krishna conscious. And even if we're physically in the material world, if we have true Krishna consciousness, we're not affected by the miseries of this world. And of course, ultimately, We can leave this world altogether and have an eternal spiritual body where we can enjoy as our nature, which is our nature as a spirit soul. And what is that joy? It's the joy of serving Krishna eternally in the spiritual world. And it's also the position of knowledge, understanding our position as the eternal servant of Krishna is where we have our most natural condition, and we'll feel satisfied. But as long as we think we're anything else, if we identify as anything other than an eternal servant of Krishna, we'll have some miseries. Of course, we can take up different roles within our identification as a servant of Krishna. So within this world, we have different bodies, male body, a female body. We may have different ethnic connections, and we can use all of these in Krishna service. As a man, we can get married and take responsibility for raising Krishna conscious children. Or we can also choose to, potentially be a brahmachari or sannyasi and dedicate ourselves to, service to the Lord rather than a family life. It's not compulsory. But we can take on these different identifications. And as long as we use that in the service of Krishna, that's perfect. But it's when we over-identify with these distinctions, like Arjuna, he was a kshatriya. And so as a servant of Krishna, he was meant to be playing the role of a kshatriya, which is to be brave and acting out of dharma, not acting on the basis of his own personal kind of whim or sentiment. So in the same way for us, if we have a family, we need to embrace that role. We need to take the responsibility that this is part of my service. Krishna has given me this role in the play, if you want to think of it like that. It's all just a leela. It's just a drama. So whatever role we've been given, we should play that role properly to serve Krishna. So as a householder, you should be responsible as a father or as a mother. As a brahmachari, we have a different role. Sannyasis have a different role. And a kshatriya has a different role from a businessman, a person doing cow protection, and so on. So there's nothing wrong with having these identifications as long as we can connect it to serving Krishna and understanding that ultimately our true identity is beyond these designations. In this life, I may be a man. I may be a father. In another life, I may be a woman. In one life, I might be a Shudra who's assisting others. Or in another life, I might be a Brahmana who's guiding others. These things can change. But what doesn't change is we're eternal servant of Krishna. And this is the key point we always need to focus on for ourselves. Now, back to the idea of compassion. The ultimate compassion is to help someone to understand that they're an eternal servant of Krishna and help them to engage in Krishna consciousness, in the activities of Krishna consciousness. Other types of compassion or welfare work or charity are just on the level of the body. So again, it doesn't mean that we neglect people suffering and we are callous. I think that was the word I was looking for. That we're callous to people suffering. No, we help people and feel compassion for people in their suffering, but we don't just stop at the Band-Aid solutions that generally people are looking for in this world. Like, for example, a person's hungry, so we give them something to eat. We don't do that because we know that that's not really helping them ultimately. So what do? We get prasadam and we feed people prasadam. And that prasadam not only gives them the material need of food, but it also gives them spiritual nourishment. And there's an interesting distinction. There's a series of lectures by Jayadvaita Swami, which is a little controversial because he named it something like food for death. Having a dig at food for life. But there's some very interesting points in that talk, and I think we should highlight some of these today. So the first point is that our ultimate goal is to help people to become Krishna conscious, not just to take care of people's needs, like giving them clothes, giving them food, opening hospitals, to try to, fix material diseases and so on. This is not the purpose of the Hare Krishna movement. Prabhupada doesn't write in his 7 purposes of ISKCON anywhere that our purpose is to help cure diseases of the body, or that our purpose is to clothe people and feed people. No, he's very clear that our purpose is to help people associate together with other people and understand that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead and engage in the activities of Krishna consciousness. To understand about Krishna from his books, to practice the process of chanting Hare Krishna, to live a more simple, more natural way of life. Not for its own purpose, but in order that we can practice Krishna consciousness more peacefully. We're creating an environment where Krishna consciousness is more favorable. So in Jayadvaita Swami's course, he was talking about a few examples where one time the devotees, I think in Bangladesh, there was a lot of flooding, and they wanted to go to the place where there was the disaster and, do prasadam distribution. So even in that case of prasadam distribution, Prabhupada said, no, this is not our business. So even though it's prasadam, Prabhupada had the idea of what our ultimate purpose is. So to explain it in a different way, Stephen Covey often says that the enemy of the best is the good. In fact, I made a little rap about it. See if I can remember it. The enemy of the best is the good. How many times do you live by shoulds, doing all the things people say we're supposed to, but we know it's so true. We have to say no to say yes sometimes if we want to get the most from our lives. So I think it's relevant in this case that, yes, giving prasadam is certainly beneficial. However, what we need to consider is what's the most beneficial thing. Is it most beneficial to go out to the areas where people are, in a disaster zone and just feeding them? Or is it more important to, for example, have a center where people can come and not only be fed, but also learn about Krishna consciousness? So this is the point that Jayadvaita Swami was making in his presentation. And there was 2 points. Point number 1 is that the mission of the Krishna consciousness movement is to give Krishna consciousness to people, to train people in it, and to train people how to spread it to others. Just feeding people or, similar things like that, or, opening a hospital is not the real mission of our society. So he was talking about mission drift. And he gave the example of the Salvation Army. That when Jayadvaita Swami was younger, he'd heard of the Salvation Army, but all he knew was the op shop, where you can go and buy clothes that people don't need anymore, that they've given away in charity. So what he thought Salvation Army meant is a place where the clothes are being saved from being thrown out, something along those lines. Let's move out of the sun here. I hope it's not too noisy out here. Maybe it is, but I can't see myself because it's very sunny. So this is one of the ideas here of, it's cold out here. Anyway, get my train of thought again here. Yeah, so the mission of the Salvation Army was actually to save the souls and to to take them back to heaven, back to Jesus or whatever. But in the course of time, the mission had become distracted to the point where most people only understand Salvation Army as a place where you get secondhand clothes. So he was expressing in his seminar in ISKCON, we need to be careful of this also, that we don't have mission drift, that we think that our mission is to do charitable work because that's what people like. I hope it's not too noisy with the traffic behind me. I'll go to a quieter end of the car park here. So in that little rap that I was singing, the idea is also given there that sometimes we do things because that's what we think other people will like. We're looking for approval from people and doing things because we think that it'll make us popular. But Prabhupada was never really into popularity. That wasn't one of his missions. He said that we don't care for popularity. If you want to be popular, then you'll dance naked. That means compromise. So rather than trying to do this charitable kind of work on the mundane platform, we need to connect it with Krishna consciousness and think, what is the ultimately best use of my time? So even giving prasadam, if that's all that we do, is good, of course. But perhaps it would be better if we can give people prasadam and also teach them about Krishna consciousness at the same time, not just limit ourselves to just what people might just feel as charity of feeding people. So of course it's not to take away from prasadam distribution, but we also need to think, are we just going to stop there, or are we going to actually give people Krishna consciousness? We can also, so that was the first point that Jayadvaita Swami was making, that we need to keep our mission clear. And he gave another example from Prabhupada's teachings where the devotees were talking about being a drug rehabilitation center or something where people could come who had drug problems and they would help them to get off drugs. And Prabhupada said, yes, we can do this. And this is the program. Everybody who comes to the temple, they shave their head and they attend the Mangalarti and they chant their 16 rounds and attend all the classes. So basically he was saying that you just follow Krishna consciousness and that is our program for drug rehabilitation. It's not some separate program. And ultimately the idea is to become Krishna conscious, that getting off the drugs is just a side benefit. So this is one example Jayadvaita Swami was giving too, where Prabhupada was saying, look, if we just do Krishna consciousness, it solves all the other problems. So this is one point that he was making. And so we might ask, well, what about the hospital in Mumbai? Isn't that kind of Prabhupada said that we're not about opening hospitals. So that's true. We can also consider the situation that if somebody is already a doctor, that's their profession. So then they have a choice. They could either quit being a doctor, become a full-time preacher or something, which may be a possibility for some. But for most people, we have our profession. We need to make a living. And so if someone's a doctor, which is better? You're a doctor in a Kami hospital, or that all the devotee doctors get together and they have a hospital where all the doctors are devotees and they have association and all the food is prasadam and where they play Prabhupada's kirtan the whole time and where they have Bhagavad-gita classes and they're actually teaching people about Krishna consciousness while they're in hospital. So then what you've done here is it's not about opening a hospital. Now you've transformed the hospital into a Krishna conscious preaching program. And so it's a subtle distinction that someone might say, oh, Prabhupada said don't open hospitals. So certainly, as devotees, that's not our main mission. But if we have all these doctors that are already qualified and we have the opportunity to create a preaching situation like that, we have to analyze things a little bit more deeply, not so superficially. And that brought up another point that Jayadvaita Swami said, is that when we talk about charity, he was quoting Lord Chaitanya, when Lord Chaitanya, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, he says, if at all you're interested in logic and an argument, apply that to the mercy of Lord Chaitanya. So Jayadvaita Swami was saying the same thing when it comes to charity. Apply that to the service of the devotees. So on the one hand, we can engage in different types of charity and dovetail that towards bringing people towards Krishna consciousness. And the other aspect of it is that we should offer charity to devotees. In the Bhagavad-gita, it describes charity in different modes of nature, and the ultimate is to give charity to a self-realized soul. And then we are serving them, and we're also getting the benefit. And in our society, another aspect to consider is that if we really care for the devotees in our movement and give that our priority, then people will be very secure to be part of it. We don't want to be going out and feeding, the people at the battle zone, and yet the devotees, our own devotees, are starving. We should always prioritize that. We want to look after our own family first, so to speak. So these are the 2 points that I got from Jayadvaita Swami's presentation, aside from, the controversial title and things like that, is that, one, we should think what is the best use of our time and what will best support the mission that Prabhupada has given us without compromising. And second of all, how can we support the devotees in our movement and make them the object of our charitable work as a priority. And so when we have this kind of criteria in mind, our service is Vaishnava Seva and helping people to become Krishna conscious. And this is real compassion, because it's not just on the bodily platform. It's not just dealing with people's mind and body, but it's actually engaging people in Krishna service and helping them to become Krishna conscious and develop themselves in their Krishna consciousness, to come closer to Krishna. So that's the real compassion, to help people understand who they are and as a servant of Krishna, and to help them practice Krishna consciousness. And we do that by both bringing new people to Krishna consciousness and also caring for the ones who are already practicing Krishna consciousness. So if you have any question, or you'd just like to say Hare Krishna, it'd be nice to know who I'm speaking with. And if there's any questions, I can answer it if you put it in the chat right now. I should have mentioned it earlier, but I appreciate those of you who are taking the time to listen. It's nice to know that I'm not just talking to a screen, but there's someone on the other side. And I just wonder what you think, if you have any thoughts on this, in terms of charity work and feeling compassion for others. There's another example I was thinking of, that a devotee does feel compassion when they see people suffering. The difference is that we know that the solution is Krishna consciousness, not just some mundane solution. Just like, even to the point where Prabhupada was watching people playing golf and he was crying. They thought that they were happy, and yet Prabhupada was crying because he realized that they were, that they didn't understand the ultimate goal of life, and therefore they were just wasting their time, on a useless game. So feeling compassion, and another example that of course comes to mind recently is we had the people that lost their jobs due to the vaccine mandate in New Zealand and in other places like in Canada. So in New Zealand, there was a big protest at the Wellington Parliament, and those people were really suffering. And a lot of people were not feeling any compassion for those people. Oh, they should have got the jab. What's their problem? But no, these people, out of good conscience chose not to take an injection. And as a result of that, they were forced out of their jobs, and they were forced out of their livelihood. And, as devotees, we feel compassion for people like that have been put into such an awkward situation. But our solution is not anything to do with, vaccines or anything like that, or parliamentary, changing the government or whatever. Those things might, apparently help temporarily from the material point of view. But a devotee sees that these people are suffering, and we feel compassion for these people. So what do devotees do? They go and chant at the protest, and they go and give prasadam at the protest, and they teach people about Krishna consciousness in that setting. It's one of the points from the purpose-driven church that they say that people are the most open-minded towards taking up spiritual life when they're going through a transition or when they're going through a tough time. So it's natural for devotees to go to a place like the Profest, as we call it, the protest at the Parliament grounds, because the people are suffering and they're looking for shelter, and they can't really find it in the material world, and therefore we can give them Krishna consciousness and they can get real shelter. And in this purport, I don't have the Bhagavad-gita with me anymore, it's in the car, but there was a point there where maybe I'll go and have a look at it if I have time. But yeah, I thank you, Beverly, for attending again and listening again. It's always nice to see you here. The point I was going to make, and I'll see if I can find the reference here, is that when we are more worried about the material consequences of something rather than the Krishna consciousness aspect, this is materialistic. And therefore, as a devotee, we're fearless. We do our duty, regardless of can we see if it's in this particular verse or not. So it says, when one works without attachment to fruitive results, and is situated in the fixed conception of the real self. So this is the point I want to make, is that, like at the Profest, there was a consideration that, if we chant and if we give prasadam to people, then it might the government might not like the Hare Krishna movement anymore, and they'll treat us badly. But this is fruitive. This is worrying about the results. No, we do our duty. Our duty is to give Krishna consciousness to people, and we did that, and it was appreciated by all the people who were there. And the devotees are doing that, not caring for, popularity, and not caring for, if the government, likes it or not. No, we're doing our duty as a servant of Krishna, and we're offering Krishna consciousness, the real solution to all of the problems. These people are suffering, but they're trying to find solutions in material things which will never ultimately give satisfaction. And so it's the devotee's duty to go and help out of compassion. When we see that people are suffering, we can give them the real solution, Krishna consciousness. So I'll end here. Thank you for your attention. I hope that these ideas were useful, and I hope it inspires you to engage in the real work of compassion, which is giving Krishna consciousness to others and supporting the devotees who have given their lives for spreading Krishna consciousness and supporting them. So this is real compassion and real charity work. Jai. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.